Did you ever have any prolonged period where you didn't play the guitar at all?
The last year and a half, I've hardly played guitar outside of work, going and doing clinics, masterclasses, playing in various places. At home, when I'm on my own, for the first time in my life, I've hardly picked up the guitar and hardly practiced. What I've been telling myself is I'll get to the point where it just naturally comes back, and if I force it, that's probably going to be more of a problem because it's going to push me away from it even more. And you do just go through natural arcs, like a sine wave of how much you want to play the guitar. I'm 43 now and I'm no longer 16 playing 8 hours a day, and my progress is like this. My progress is very much plateau, little bit of development, plateau, and that little bit of development requires a lot of input work-wise. So when I don't want to play, I don't play unless I have to maintain, which is basically what I have been doing for if I have to do a show or a clinic or whatever. I have to have that minimum level of ability in order to be able to do the show. Usually for me it's left hand minimum ability. Then I'll work that up.
Do you have any pre-practice or performance rituals to get you in the zone?
All I need before a show, this is just cliched, but I just need my hands to be relatively warm. If you're struggling to get warm, I will often go to the bathroom and fill a basin up with hot water and just leave my hands in there for a while. And also the tops of my wrists, I will leave those in the basin just to get my hands warm, because what I have found in the past is if I've tried to warm up too aggressively because I'm worried my hands aren't warm, I often find I get aches and pains through my hand, almost through stress, because I feel my hands are not where they need to be. Whereas this whole thing of dunking your hands in quite hot water is a very passive thing, back to being passive, a very passive thing that just warms through the hands, and you're not going to run into that kind of stressing the hands out. What I would mention is there is a danger to warming up on the guitar too much, in that if things are not going the way you want them to, it can really stress you out and put you in a bad place before the gig mentally or before the show. So I'd recommend you warm up a little bit, but also try this thing of putting your hands in warm water and relax.
During your journey with guitar, how did you best break through plateaus or slumps?
I always found that I could never force myself through plateaus. I had to find a way of becoming obsessed with the thing that I was trying to do. Now, there's no specific way of being able to do this. You just have to experiment a little bit. But I've found whenever I've got through a plateau, or whenever I've become good at something, it's not because I found some trick or snake oily way of getting through it. I had to essentially just become obsessed and work at that thing consistently. That's what worked for me. Not having a specific practice regime or like my time detailed out in a very specific way, just becoming obsessed and working and working and working on that thing because it was the only thing I could think about, basically. So if you can find the way to become obsessed with that particular element of guitar playing or music or whatever you're doing, you're almost guaranteed to be able to push through to that next plateau.
Tom, what is the most difficult part of learning the guitar?
I think it depends what stage you're at, but initially it's physical, and then I think it's probably maintaining positive forward motion. So being able to keep yourself motivated, I think, is probably the hardest thing, because it's a difficult thing to do. So finding a way to keep yourself motivated, basically, I think is the hardest thing.
And specifically when you hit plateaus and things like that?
Yeah, so initially it's physical, obviously the fingers hurt, and then when you get past that initial stage, you have lots of growth, then it plateaus. Then to push through those plateaus is probably the hardest thing, because everything else is just time and effort, basically, but the plateaus are hard to push through. So those are the things that have stopped me in the past, I think, the most.
Do you hear the note in your mind before you play it?
So this is very much dependent on what's happening, in fact to a much greater extent than I used to. If I'm playing melodies, I'm usually hearing them around the same time I'm playing them, but I'll be totally honest, they're probably not 100% the same as I heard them. And I've done a lot of functional based ear training, but I don't have the ability to hear a melody that's relatively complex and just play it back immediately and know exactly what it is. It just isn't the way I play. When I play the stuff that's faster subdivisions and more note dense, what I hear is the very detailed contour of the line. So I'm not hearing every single note, but I know exactly where the contour of the line is going. But if you ask me to sing the line exactly, there's no way I could sing the line.
What aspect of practice do you think people overlook the most?
I'm going to go back to time here again. I think we see, especially these days, unless you've got a very good teacher who's guiding you through this stuff, it's very easy to get stuck on the kind of social media train of, oh my God, look how flashy everybody is, look how amazing everybody is, whilst forgetting that good time feel will make everything you play sound fantastic. You only have to listen to Mark Lettieri play for 2 seconds to get the idea that it doesn't matter what he's playing, it all sounds amazing because his time is so good. He's tight and his time is like he can play with the time and do whatever he wants groove-wise with the time. That rhythmic control is more important than any other aspect of your guitar playing, bar none.
What is the number one piece of advice that you give to an intermediate guitarist?
For intermediate guitar players, I would absolutely 100% say that time is the most important thing that you should be working on, bar none. It doesn't matter how many chords you learn, how many songs you can play, it doesn't matter what fancy techniques you might want to learn, you have to have good time, and if you have good time, everything you play will sound good. It's absolutely number one, bar nothing else for me. I think that goes for any instrument, but guitar players are particularly guilty of not having great time. So yeah, work on your time. And by that, at this point, at your intermediate level, I literally mean being able to play in time well. You know, we're not talking about crazy time feel or anything, or different types of groove, nailing those. I literally mean just have good time, internal time, be able to feel time well, and be able to understand different subdivisions and be able to play them well against a groove or on your own is vital, really, really important.
What's your most tried and true practice routine?
I've never had one. I've met people on both sides of this argument. Some people thrive on a practice routine. They thrive on organisation, basically. And then you tend to find that a lot of aspects of their lives are very organised. They keep notes for things, they have really well organised diaries, so on and so forth. I'm not that person, never have been. I've had periods in my life where I've been obsessed with particular players, done a bunch of transcription. I've had periods in my life where I've been obsessed with a particular harmonic device, a particular scale even, a particular chord progression, a particular technique, a particular whatever. And I've just gone down that road basically, and until the next thing is turned up. And that really is how I've made progress in my playing. By organising my time into small chunks where I've been, I'm going to do this for 5 minutes, this for 5 minutes, so on and so forth. It's never worked for me essentially. Now that's not advice. You will find the way that works for you, but that's what worked for me.
What trick or theory had the most bang for the buck influence on your playing?
Okay, this might sound a bit cliched, but I would say understanding how to use minor pentatonics to generate interesting modal sounds. So for instance, using a minor pentatonic a semitone below a major 7 chord to create a Lydian sound. And that's primarily because minor pentatonics fit so beautifully on the guitar and give you so much vocabulary that's so guitaristic and so unique to the instrument, that being able to utilize that vocabulary in different harmonic scenarios without changing the physicality of the lines was very appealing to me. I don't think about it so much these days, but back in the day, that was something that I was absolutely blown away by, if that makes sense, that kind of process.
What's the least expensive piece of gear that you own?
So the cheapest bit of gear that I use, and this is cheesy, but it's true, is the pick. And this is just a Jazz 3, one of the larger Jazz 3s basically, and they're very, very cheap. But what's interesting is, although this is a cheap piece of gear, it's probably the piece of gear that if I didn't have it, would affect my playing the most. So it's actually super, super vital. So the most important piece of gear, other than my actual hands, is the pick basically, and that's usefully the cheapest piece of gear.
What's the most expensive piece of gear that you use?
The most expensive piece of gear is probably, that I use on a daily basis, is probably my audio interface. But if we're talking guitar gear, the most expensive piece of gear is probably, there's not actually that much crazy expensive gear in here, is probably, given that they're almost impossible to buy these days, is probably my Mesa Boogie setup. So the Studio Pre and the 5050 Power Amp, because all that stuff is very, very difficult to buy in the UK these days and is mega bucks, because Mesa Boogie do no longer distribute in the UK, so you can't buy them basically. So the second-hand stuff has gone up massively as well.
Who did you spend the most time stealing licks from and transcribing?
So there's been phases. Pat Metheny was a huge one. I don't think you hear a lot of that in my playing these days, but you would have done 15 years ago. Kurt Rosenwinkel as well, Wayne Krantz, and I think there's a little bit more Wayne Krantz in my playing than people think because I'm a legato guy. It's actually quite a lot of my playing informed by him. And then Greg Howe, huge amounts of Greg Howe. Again, I don't think I sound massively like Greg Howe in my own playing, but all of those different things have come together into one thing basically. But those are the guitar players I've probably learnt phrases and lines and solos from the most. I suppose I should add Brett Garsed in there as well for the legato side of things.
Do you feel like there are any passive behaviors that contribute to guitar development, such as listening to different kinds of music or learning another instrument?
100%, without a shadow of a doubt. There are lots of passive things that are useful when you're trying to learn any instrument. I would absolutely recommend that you go and see as much and listen to as much live music as possible to see the thing, especially these days where a lot of this stuff is online. Go and listen to real musicians, go and talk to real musicians, go and see what the actual thing that you want to do, you know, how it is in real life and how live music sounds and how musicians interact, especially improvised music if you're interested in doing that. I think that's really important to see how people interact with other musicians and what the role of the guitar is in a real world sense, where you can see that and hear it happening in front of you, and you'll be very inspired by seeing live musicians. Go and see as many gigs, jam sessions, whatever, that you can. And also on an active level, go and play with lots of musicians as well, not just passively, but I think you can do that activity passively as well.
During any point in your journey, did you develop a habit or less than ideal technique that you've tried to fix in your guitar playing?
Anybody who knows my playing will know that I'm primarily a left-hand guy, legato guy, and that is due to problems, I would say, that have been placed into my picking technique from when I was naive and young. So my alternate picking technique in particular is pretty poor in that I have a lot of raw speed, but have developed a bounce when I cross strings on my right hand. And anything like that that's like a tension-based thing, if you've learnt it at a young age or even an older age and you've baked it in, is incredibly hard to remove. Very, very difficult to remove. So at this point, because I have the ability to express myself with the technique I do have, that has very much been put to the side. And every now and again, I'll pick the guitar up and go, right, let's try and fix this problem. And I find it very, very difficult to. But I think most guitar players end up with a preference for one technique. What I should say at the end here is don't stress if particular techniques are hard for you, because you will find a way to express yourself.
How do you approach improvisation, and what tips do you have for creating memorable solos on the spot?
As an overarching kind of thing in terms of taking a solo and shaping the development of that solo, this is something that's actually quite difficult, and it depends. You've got to be playing with good players who can actually follow and build with you. But I generally will start out the same way a lot of people start out, playing just a few notes, allowing myself to outline the harmony in very simple ways, very simple melodies, basically allowing myself to build ideas that I can develop. Sometimes you just want to go straight in, all guns blazing. I'll generally start out in a moderate register, not too low, but maybe around the lower end of the guitar, maybe the top 4 strings. And if I'm having a good day, I will try and work further up towards the higher register as I go and play more rhythmically dense material or more rhythmically complex material as I go, and try and build things so the rhythm section can follow, and as they build around the ideas that I'm laying down.
How do you maintain creativity and avoid getting stuck in a musical rut?
This to me is really important actually, because I have found myself in a rut recently. One thing I would say is the best experiences I've ever had on the instrument that have made me come away from those experiences and think, man, I cannot wait to work on X, Y, Z, is by playing with other musicians. You must play with other musicians, because if you sit in your studio, your bedroom, your room, wherever the space is that you play, and you only ever play on your own, and you watch other guitar players, but you never interact with them in a real musical experience, you will end up in that scenario where you can't see a way forwards. Music is called playing music for a reason. It's supposed to be a fun, interactive, communal sport. It's not a sport, a communal activity. It's got to be with other people. So I cannot emphasize that enough. If you are struggling to make progress or see a way forward with your playing, try and find some other people to play with.
What is the number one piece of advice you'd give to a beginner who is just starting to learn the guitar?
If you wanted to take it seriously, you want to actually become a good guitar player. It's not just a question of strumming out some tunes, which is a perfectly laudable and good thing to do. But if you want to take it seriously, I really, really recommend getting a good teacher, somebody who can help you with the basics and make sure that you're set up well, because guitar is one of those instruments where for some reason we just get anybody picking up the instrument and not picking up the instrument, that's a good thing. You need to get those fundamentals right to have a pleasurable journey later on if you want to take it seriously. You don't want to be fixing a load of problems later on physically. I know that from personal experience because I was self-taught for the first 5 years of my playing, and I developed all sorts sorts of bad habits that now I struggle to fix. So definitely get a good teacher, someone who can inspire you. I can't give you advice as to how to find that person, but I would say it's as important to find a good teacher as it is to have the will to want to learn and the desire to want to learn, I think, at that stage of guitar playing.
What role has music theory played in your development as a guitarist, and how do you strike a balance between theory and instinct when playing?
Theory side of things has played a huge role in my particular journey because it was one of the things I became very obsessed with. So I really, for some reason, again, I don't know why, just wanted to understand music theory on a very, very deep level. I mean, not insane, I'm no Jacob Collier, but just wanted to have a very good understanding of music theory. So that pushed my guitar playing to a different level because of my understanding of how musical elements fit together in a simple and deep way. It isn't at first, if you've never done it before, it's painful. But once you get reasonable at it, it's an incredibly rewarding thing because most of my improvisation is over memorized chord changes or reading chord changes from a chord chart. And that's a different part of the brain to just literally switching off and just playing by ear. So I would thoroughly recommend that you do that. It's a very, very useful skill. I'd thoroughly recommend it.
What's your advice for aspiring guitarists who are looking to find their own voice and their signature sound on the instrument?
Listen to as much music and as wide a variety of players as you can. Try and write down as many ideas as you can because, as in soloing, line-based ideas or comping ideas, because if you keep a diary of some of those ideas. This is one thing I am good organisationally with, or I used to be. I don't do it so much anymore. I would write down ideas that I had, and then I would try and develop those ideas and try and run with them for a long time. So I really, really explored those ideas. Because if you just transcribe other people's ideas, what you end up with is a catalogue of things that other people have done. And if that catalogue's wide enough, you probably will start to find your own sound. And you'll find things that are you, things that appeal to you and sounds that you like, and then you'll start to find those things happen when you improvise. They just start to come out in your playing. It takes a long time, but exploration is the name of the game.
When you are improvising, what are you thinking?
Usually I'm trying as hard as possible to maintain what the changes are in my head because I have a terrible memory for changes. But if that's all going well, I am generally trying to listen to what I'm playing and listen to the band as much as possible. So I don't know whether that's actively thinking about anything, but it's a lot of active listening. So I suppose that is thinking, but it's not about a specific thing. It's just listening and reacting to what's happening around me. When everything's going well, that does change. If I'm stressed and I have to think about the changes, then generally I'm thinking about the changes, and you can probably hear that in my playing when that's happening, because I'll look less relaxed and I will be playing more square to the changes. But on a good day, when everything's coming together and the changes are all happening without me thinking, then I'll just be listening as much as possible and reacting.
Have you ever experienced an injury, strain, tension due to playing, and how did this change your playing practice, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, so no pain. I've never experienced pain with my playing at all, but we talked about this a little bit before we started all these sessions, these questions. I do currently have ulnar nerve compression and another compression, I forget the name of it, thoracic outlet syndrome, that's what it's called, across here. And that's meant that I've lost a decent chunk of control of these two fingers, or strength and dexterity and stamina. And I think if this had happened when I was younger, I'd have found it very, very difficult to deal with. But I'm a lot more stoic about it these days. And I think realistically, you just have to be quite stoic about these things, because your body will tell you when you are doing something wrong. You cannot fight against that. You have to go with it, and you have to just treat it as, this is happening to me. I'm going to go through this. I'm not going to fight against it. I'm going to do all the things I can to make it better, but it is what it is, and I'm going to have to deal with it.
How do you approach learning new techniques and incorporating them into your playing?
So if I heard someone using a technique that I really liked and I was very interested in the early days, it was because I was learning songs and solos by the guitar players I loved. So I would literally learn them from tab books and then try and, incorporate those techniques based on what that player was specifically doing. Later down the line, when I was a bit more knowledgeable and a bit more nuanced in my practice, I would do what a lot of people do. I would write things that involved that technique in order to get it into my playing. And then later down the line, and this is really important for me, my particular approach, is I would improvise with them very, very slowly. So I would have every single aspect of the technique identical to how it would be if I was playing in real, world scenario with a tempo, with a subdivision, but I would do it incredibly slowly, making sure the technique doesn't alter at all. And that way I can use the technique in an improvisational setting as opposed to it being just fixed things that I can play.
Is playing guitar at a high level more about talent or work ethic?
On a sort of existential level, I believe that everything is luck all the way down. You have almost no control over your genetics. You have a limited amount of control over the amount of practice you do, but you have no control over your will and desire to practice. That's all down to nature and nurture, and you didn't have any control over that at any point in the process. I don't believe in like God-given talent, so on and so forth, but I also am very realistic about the fact that you can't work miracles, but I do just fundamentally just cannot get round the fact that I do unfortunately believe that it's luck all the way down, and you are not in control of most of the things that you think you're in control of. I basically don't believe in free will. I don't believe in any of those things. So again, that might seem like a negative thing, but it doesn't mean you can't enjoy the journey and you can't get a huge amount out of it.
What was the single most effective thing you've learned that opened the door to playing guitar?
So for me, it has to really be being able to visualize the fretboard with a lot of freedom, because the guitar is quite an abstract instrument, and I think I've got a system. I don't use the system that is often taught, or some of the systems that are often taught. I use some 3-note per string and some caged and all that stuff, but I have this intervallic based system visualizing the fretboard that came over the years that really, I know people use this phrase a lot and it's a cliche, but unlocked the instrument for me. So if I wanted to be able to play over, I had this goal of being able to play over any set of chord changes just at sight. Seems a strange goal now, but it was the goal. And so that actually unlocked a huge amount of stuff for me. So I really feel like now I can see harmony on the guitar. I am not a guy who can just hear everything immediately and just play it. I don't have that golden ear connection to fingers. It's got a lot better over the years, and it's not bad, but it wasn't there as a kid. I didn't have that. No one in my family has that. It's not like a genetic trait that's passed down.